Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our Redeemer Lutheran Church Bible study on the Book of Proverbs. Pastor Eric Kleinschmidt here with you once again for Proverbs chapter 23. If you're looking for the worship service from Redeemer Lutheran Church, I'll put that link right up above. Went the right way this time. Today, as we discuss Proverbs 23, we are still in that section of wise words that Solomon may have gathered from other places, other writers, even history, and he updates them. He's not just repeating them verbatim in most cases. Rather, he is saying like, hey, this guy had some smart stuff to say, but he didn't quite have the full revelation of God. And Solomon was blessed with that, at least more than anybody else that had ever been and probably ever has been since, Jesus anyway. And so Solomon not only borrows some of the smart things that other people came up with, but he also enlarges them. He makes them even better in his God-given wisdom. So what exactly is 100% Solomon's own wisdom in this section of Proverbs 23? And what Solomon is taking from other people, like the Egyptian that we talked about last week in last chapter 22, we don't know, okay? But what we do know is that what Solomon does repeat is also inspired by God himself, okay? So there we have a little bit of a bonus to anything that appears here that we know that God wants it to be known as something that he had given before, at least in part, to other people. Okay, imagine God's wisdom as like, it's almost Halloween, right? So God's wisdom is this entire bowl of candy. It's all the stuff that he bought. It's 5,000 pieces of assorted, beautiful candy that he is prepared to give out on Halloween, right? And so trick-or-treating begins about 4 o'clock. When the first kid comes, God doesn't dump the whole bowl into the kid's little pumpkin, right? He doles it out piece by piece as the night goes on, okay? And so that's how we can understand wisdom, that everything that we might learn, that we might figure out, God already knows. But he realizes that, if he gave us the whole bowl of candy, we might eat ourselves to death, all right? So he's got to give the wisdom out piecemeal when we're ready for it. So you might ask the question, does God know that there's a cure for cancer that we will discover at some point? Of course God knows that. Why doesn't he give us that cure right now? Well, because maybe we're not ready for it for whatever reason, all right? And I know that's hard to accept, especially if you're one who's struggling with cancer or have a loved one who has struggled with cancer. And yet we can understand that we're not always ready to just have everything right away. Maybe there's other things that need to happen. Maybe there is a condition of humanity that has to be met. Maybe the cure would be so outlandishly expensive that it would cause wars or something like that until we can figure out these other technologies that are in process right now coming together to make it affordable for people. And maybe those technologies we're not quite ready for yet either. So it's this whole big puzzle that only God can put together. But I think you can all understand that it may not be best for us to just have a big download of everything that God knows, that might not actually be good for us. So wisdom is this whole bucket of candy, and God has to give it out as the trick-or-treating goes on. I'm carrying that metaphor. If you're watching this and it's not near Halloween, sorry, but we're a couple weeks out here. But you understand that God throughout time has given wisdom here and there, and we're always discovering, and that's part of the adventure of the human experience, of course. Okay, so Solomon has a lot bigger share of that wisdom than anybody else, and so reading what Solomon has written, even if it's something that he is repeating from someone else, gives it a fuller understanding. Hope that makes sense to you. Today, we're going to have really 4 different themes, and they are interesting themes in the book of Proverbs and in the Bible as well. We're going to start off with a little bit of talk about dining etiquette. I don't know when the last time that you really thought about how you are to dine in the public, in the view of others, or out in a public space where you're being watched and being judged about how well you conduct yourself at this meal. Maybe the last time you're at a wedding or an awards banquet or something like that. But for most of us, it's very rare. So we don't think about etiquette a lot. Just kind of. So let's see here. One of my jobs, of course, is conducting weddings and other more formal events. And so I do believe it's important for pastors to kind of understand a little bit about what's accepted social graces these days. And so I encourage all my vicars to read or at least own a copy of Etiquette by Emily Post. It's been outdated a lot. There's a lot of things that we just don't do anymore that sadly we've lost. But still, there are some generally accepted rules. And so when you get a question such as, well, what side does the bride walk down the aisle on? There are some answers in books like this. So etiquette is a thing that we're losing very quickly, and yet it still matters in a lot of different parts of society. Everybody's been enamored with the royal ascendancy, right, as Queen Elizabeth passed away. And so they see a lot of very precise etiquette that needs to take place, and we're always fascinated with what the royals can and can't do out in public, right? Also down south, there is still like a promenade culture, and we get a taste of that with like formal dances at high schools and stuff like that here. But that has its own etiquette, I would say, in the South, certain places in the South, and that preserve those sort of things. Like, if you have daughters, have they ever been taught how to curtsy? That's an interesting question, right? If you go back a couple hundred years, of course, all of them would have been taught that regardless. My grandmother taught English at a normal school, which was different than a finishing school. I understand that there's a distinction that normal school was for the normal class of people, and finishing school was if you had money or you were part of higher society, right? And you'd learn a little bit more refined etiquette, things like that. So etiquette is still a part of that. We're going to see Solomon address a little bit of that right at the beginning of chapter 23. We're also then going to see some themes of parental pride, as Solomon is speaking once again to his sons primarily, even though he's also speaking to all of us who read his words many, many generations after. The end of chapter 23 is going to touch on addiction, particularly alcoholism. So you might want to stick around for that if that's of any interest to you. And then also, we're going to have a lot of talk in like the last several verses about eyes. And it's not going to come out in the English as much as it will come out in the Hebrew, but Solomon is going to reveal his artistry as he makes a bunch of play on words about the eye. But we're going to see the eye being a central theme kind of all through this chapter. All right? So all that's coming up. Let's get started right there at verse 1. Solomon begins, and remember, this is in his wise words of others section, okay? So we don't know if this really was Solomon's wisdom or if he's borrowing it from someone else, but Solomon is reiterating it as being wise if it did come from someone else. He says something that seems a little odd. When you sit down to eat with a ruler, observe carefully what is before you, and put a knife to your throat if you are given to appetite, okay? Now, we think of a knife going to the throat as a threat, a hostage kind of situation, but this is really, you should curb your appetite is what the Hebrew is really saying here. So see all the delicacies that are set before you when you go to eat with a ruler. He's going to lay out the best of everything he has, and if your tummy is growling and you're saying, well, I want to try this and this and this, like you're at the Golden Buffet or whatever is down the street there. He said, stop yourself. So this is a bit of etiquette. It's also a bit of wisdom for everybody, as what we're going to see follow. Here in chapter 23, we see a different structure to Proverbs. Usually we had in the same verse, the first half being a positive statement and the second half being a contrary negative statement, or the other way around. But here we're going to see Proverbs actually extend over several verses. And we have some of the longest Proverbs of the whole book here in chapter 23, including a riddle that covers verses 27 through 35. So it's almost 10 verses of one single teaching that's actually portrayed as a riddle with an answer at the end. We'll get there. So back to the banquet of the ruler. So curb your appetite is what he says. Do not desire his delicacies, for they are deceptive food. It's not what it seems. Do not toil to acquire wealth. Be discerning enough to desist. For when your eyes light on it, it is gone. So here's that theme of don't just have a greedy eye. So you see that eye is coming out right here at the beginning. So don't let your eyes be bigger than your stomach, okay? We've heard that before. So when you desire wealth and all the things that come with wealth, okay, including lots of different delicacies, don't set your heart on those things because they're not going to last. For suddenly it sprouts wings, flying like an eagle toward heaven. So verses 1 through 5 here are a warning about desiring wealth and also dining in the company of those who have wealth, because what they're offering you may not be what it seems. Their generosity may come with a price. Their display of wealth may come with a price that is hidden. So, better to be on your guard in those situations, okay? The contrary happens in verse 6, and we're going to see from verses 6 through 9 a different aspect, like the other side of the coin, as it were. For verse 6 says, do not eat the bread of a man who is stingy. Do not desire his delicacies. Okay? So we're told not to desire the delicacies of the wealthy and the generous. We're also told not to desire the delicacies of the stingy. And the term stingy here in the Hebrew actually is who is evil of eye. So if you remember in the last chapter, 22, verse 9, whoever has a bountiful eye will be blessed, for he shares his bread with the poor. So that bountiful eye means one who is looking out for opportunities to help others. That's how we understood that. If you're interested in that, you could go back to the Bible study from last week. So here we have that bountiful eye kind of is contrasted here in verse 6 with a man who is evil of eye or stingy of eye. So he's not looking to help other people, and he is known that he's kind of only looking out for himself. So when he presents you with his delicacies, when he lays a banquet before you, also be on your guard because it's probably not what it seems. So two sides of the very same coin, the wealthy and the stingy, they both want something in return for what they're offering you. He is like one who is inwardly calculating. Okay, he's scheming, and he tells you, oh, eat and drink, he says to you. But his heart is not with you. He doesn't care for you. He cares for what you can do for him or something that you have that he wants. Verse 8, you will vomit up the morsels you have eaten and waste your pleasant words. You're wasting your time, and it's going to be a foul taste in your mouth dealing with this person. Very graphic proverb here. We don't read this one often in church. Likewise, verse 9, do not speak in the hearing of a fool. I really think that verse 9 is connected to this section about stinginess. It could stand on its own, I suppose, but I really think that it's kind of the same thing. For you're wasting your pleasant words with the stingy, and likewise, do not speak in the hearing of a fool, for he will despise the good sense of your words. You will have wasted what you are giving, and it's a waste of time. So then we leave that behind, and we come back to this moving of an ancient landmark, and we talked about that last week, I think. So they didn't have plat books and things like that. So it was just these local landmarks that everybody knew that was the boundary of your property and the beginning of mine, okay, that sort of thing. If you were unscrupulous, you could go and pick it up and move it and say, oh, no, it's always been there, you know. It was always on the other side of the brook. The brook is on my property for my sheep, not yours, that sort of thing. Solomon warns about that, don't do that, because even if you think that nobody can see, remember that God sees all. Remember point number 6, okay? So God sees all, and he will judge. Do not enter the fields of the fatherless. So do not trespass on those who have no protector. So if a family inherited this land because their husband and father died, and they're waiting for their kinsman redeemer or a family member, or perhaps they have none. And so it's kind of seen as sort of free land, but not really free because there's still heirs and stuff like that. It's ripe for the picking. Especially if he planted before he died, and you could go and just harvest that or steal livestock out of it or do whatever. God is warning against that because he sees. Look at verse 11. For their Redeemer is strong. And notice that it's capitalized here, okay? The Hebrew word for Redeemer here is goel, okay? And goel literally means to rescue, to ransom. Like you are a kidnapped victim and your Redeemer comes and pays for you to be rescued. And this is a word that is ascribed to Jesus, of course, does it by Job. For our Goel lives. I know that my Goel lives, all right? This church is named Goel, as it were, okay, Redeemer. Their Redeemer is strong. He will plead their cause against you. Jesus says this, that he has an eye for the widow and the fatherless, and that God has a specific care for them. And Jesus is, of course, that Redeemer and that mediator. And it's nice to know that if you are in that situation of being an orphan or a widow, that Jesus has a special place for you in his heart and that he has his eye toward you. Again, the eye comes out all the time here. Why is that? That's a good question. So Jesus talks about it in Matthew 6. So he's talking about do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, something that Solomon just revealed. So when Solomon talks about like don't let your eyes set on riches, isn't that interesting? So Solomon, who might be repeating wise words from somebody that came before him, and he elaborates on them and expands them in a great wisdom. But then Jesus comes and he expands upon even what Solomon said. So as wise as Solomon was, he was no match for Jesus because, well, Solomon got his wisdom originally from Jesus, who is God. Okay, so that makes sense, right? So Jesus is the full revelation of God's wisdom and everything. So Jesus says the same thing that Solomon said, or really Solomon is saying the same thing that Jesus would say. Time is not linear for God, right? Do not lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven. Treasures on earth, sorry, I messed that up. Where neither moth nor rust destroys, where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Now look what he says here. The eye of the lamp, the eye is the lamp of the body. So if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light in you is darkness, how great is that darkness? So eye here is not just talking about if you need glasses or not. We're talking about what your eye is set upon. Is it set upon earthly things that will perish and rust, or is it set upon heavenly, wise, good things, righteous things? Obviously, we know the answer for Jesus, and we know the answer for Solomon, and that is wisdom, all right? So set your eye on things that are appropriate, and there your heart will follow, okay? So desire what is good. Let's see. Verse 12 in Proverbs 23, apply your heart to instruction and your ear to words of knowledge. This is a repetition of the proverb we've seen throughout this entire book. Begins at the very beginning, that wisdom comes from the instruction of our elders who are instructing us in the word, particularly parents, okay? Do not withhold discipline from a child. If you strike him with a rod, he will not die. This is a reiteration of a previous proverb, spare the rod, spoil the child. This is partially where that comes from. There's actually multiple proverbs that speak to that. Notice here that this one covers 2 verses. If you strike him with the rod, you will save his soul from Sheol. So in the previous one where we saw this spare the rod, spoil the child type proverb, we mentioned, or at least I mentioned, that doesn't necessarily mean physical punishment, hitting, spanking, those sorts of things. It just represents discipline. Here, definitely, though, we get the more impression that it is a physical strike. although it doesn't necessarily, it could be a metaphorical sense, of course, but I think most people would understand strike him with the rod as a physical form of punishment. The purpose there is not to cause pain for the purpose of causing pain. It's to teach a child what is right and what is wrong. When my 4-year-old reaches for a hot burner on the stove and I slap his hand, right, he does not immediately understand why I abused him in that way, right? And it seems like great abuse, like, oh, why did you do that to me? Well, he doesn't understand that that little bit of pain is trying to teach him and spare him from a really big pain, all right? Now, could I also yell at him? Could I also, pick him up and move him? Yeah, but sometimes in the moment, you don't get away from there, just sort of that way. What we're talking about here is that I still think that the type of discipline is not as important as the giving of discipline itself, okay? So whatever you're going to do, I think that the Lord disciplines those that he loves like a father disciplines his children that he loves. We do have to have discipline, and that is unpleasant. All discipline seems unpleasant at the time, but later it produces a harvest of righteousness, the New Testament says. Okay, so that's what's being laid out here. Even though, yes, I do think it allows, and certainly these verses lend themselves to more physical forms of punishment. It's not, I would say, required, but it is allowed. My son, if your heart is wise, my heart too will be glad. Here we see the first proverb that really brings about that parental pride that I was talking about. And this applies for Solomon and his sons, but also for all people that have children, of course. If your heart is wise, my heart too will be glad. We want nothing more than for our children to be wise, to be healthy and smart and make good decisions and do what is in their best interest and be good people and all of that. And when we see that, regardless of whether others recognize that or whether they're wealthy or anything like that, that's what makes us glad as parents, to see our children succeed and succeed in the right way. My inmost being will exalt when your lips speak what is right. So when you hear your children say things that are good and right and true and honest and wise, your heart goes, oh, they do learn. They did get something good that makes me happy. So we see that what you say gets said back to you in a way if you're passing on that wisdom, especially godly wisdom. Some advice: let not your heart envy sinners. Do not let your eye, okay? Jesus talks about the heart and the eye, okay? I think that's definitely through here too. Continue in the fear of the Lord all the day. Surely there is a future, and your hope will not be cut off. Surely there is a future. Those words there give us a little bit of indication that Solomon knows that it's not going to be easy to continue in the fear of the Lord all the day. He knows how difficult it is. And he knows that discouragement and despair will be part of that Christian life. And so he adds this: surely there is a future. Your hope will not be put to shame. Jesus says the very same thing a lot through the Gospels. Verse 19, hear my son and be wise. Direct your heart in the way. Be not among drunkards. Okay, I wonder what the note says here in E. Those who drink too much wine. Well, duh, yeah. Be not among drunkards or among gluttonous eaters of meat. This is not a condemnation of meat eaters and a promotion of vegetarianism. What we're talking about is those who abuse God's gifts, right, of wine and of food, rich food, meat, whatever you want to talk about. So we see this in verse 21. The drunkard and the glutton, not just the meat eater, will come to poverty, okay? Slumber will clothe them with rags. This is kind of a return of the sluggard a little bit, right? We get that if they're not going to pay attention to what is good, they will only have poverty. So it's easy and it's pleasant to be amongst those who eat and drink lavishly and live lavishly, but I think reality proves this, is that doesn't last. Verse 22, Listen to your father who gave you life, and do not despise your mother when she is old. Fourth commandment stuff here. There's no expiration date on that fourth commandment. It doesn't expire when you turn 18 or 21 or 35. Or the biggest change happens when somebody gets married. So I just had the opportunity to do a wedding for a young couple, and we talk about how for this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And that changes what I call the sphere of responsibility. So when you're children, you have this responsibility to your parents. So father and mother are to be obeyed above other people, above your neighbor, okay, above your friends, okay, those sorts of things. But then when marriage happens, God creates a new family. And there your loyalty shifts a little bit. You are still called to honor your father and mother. Again, the fourth commandment does not have an expiration date. However, when you are one flesh and you love your spouse as your own body and your children, that's the primary responsibility that you have. So if mom or dad commands you to do something that is not in the best interest of your marriage and family, you are free to disobey them cautiously, I would say, all right, with respect, okay? Say, Mom, Dad, I appreciate your advice, but I'm not going to follow it, and I have to do things this way, and I really do appreciate you thinking about me, and I do hear you, but I'm not going to do that because it's not what's in the best interest for my marriage, for my family, and I have to do that first, okay? There's still a respect there, even if we disagree, okay? So there's a change in our loyalty that happens. So here we have, listen to your father who gave you life. Do not despise your mother when she is old. So you're still called to honor your father and mother throughout your entire life. Marriage does change that dynamic a little bit, but it doesn't take it away completely. Certainly care for our elders and parents. This does not give elderly people and older people a right to exasperate their children or to be rude. I hear that a lot. I'm old. I say what I want. I tell it like it is, and everybody should just accept that because I'm old and I put in my time, or whatever nonsense you come up with. There's no license for that, and I just don't understand that whole perspective, and it's really frustrating to deal with when you try to tell somebody like, well, maybe not telling your neighbor why they are terrible drivers in your neighborhood, maybe that's something you shouldn't do. Like maybe your relationship with your neighbors will improve if you just kept some things to yourself. You don't have to go and knock on their door and tell them that they drive too fast through your parking lot. And then have somebody just go, well, what if they did this? And I have to look out, and it's my job. And okay, all right, I'm just done at that point. So we have the persistence of the fourth commandment, but you also have the persistence of the command, fathers, do not exasperate your children. So that's there too, okay? So there's responsibility on each side. 23, buy truth and do not sell it. Of course, we can't do that, but we understand that if you're going to pursue anything and go after truth and wisdom, buy wisdom, instruction, and understanding. Spend your money on those pursuits which may gain you those things which do not pass away. The father of the righteous will greatly rejoice, to return to that parental pride theme. He who fathers a wise son will be glad in him. Let your father and mother be glad. Let her who bore you rejoice. Great pride in those when your children turn out to be righteous, functioning, wonderful people, right? Nothing better. That doesn't mean that they're always going to do smart and good things. Okay, there's sinners like everybody else, right? But what we're talking about is in general. And remember, when we're talking about righteousness and wisdom, we're really talking about faithfulness. So when you have a child who is faithful, who fears the Lord, who cares about faith, who goes to church, who lives life according to seeking after Jesus and what is righteous, oh man, that is truly, truly a joy, because then you know that you'll have them forever. My son, give me your heart and let your eyes observe my ways. Parents are to be good examples, obviously. Again, that I theme. And then we jump all of a sudden to a prostitute is a deep pit, and adulteress is a narrow well. Sexual sins were certainly a problem for David and his descendants. Solomon knows this, and we see that throughout the house of David, right? And so this is a theme that continues to recur. Deep pit, something that you fall into and can't get out of. It's a trap. A narrow well is really a contrast with what we heard Solomon say way back in Proverbs 5. So Proverbs 5, Solomon praises a righteous wife, and he likens her to a cistern, which is a reliable storehouse of clean water, okay? And that's the contrast there in 5:15. So your wife, your spouse, is that source of clean water that gives life and joy and everything that depended upon a source of water in the ancient world. But the adulteress is a narrow well. You can't even get the bucket up. So you can get the bucket down, but once it's full, then it catches on all the sides and it's useless is what it is. It doesn't do what it's supposed to do, okay? And that is adultery in a nutshell. She lies in wait like a robber. Again, ambush theme is never positive. I would say almost in the whole Old Testament, and certainly not in Proverbs, and increases the traitors among mankind. How many wars, especially in the ancient world, were fought about adultery? Of course, Helen of Troy is a big one. How much strife has been caused because of sexual sins, right? And we see that a lot, even today. Verse 29 begins the longest section of one single sort of teaching, one sort of proverb, as it were. And it's really laid out as a type of riddle, okay? So let's kind of read the whole thing, and we'll get the answer to the riddle at the very end, and then we'll go back and we'll look at each of the parts, okay? Who has woe? Who has sorrow? Who has strife? Who has complaining? Who has wounds without cause? Who has redness of eyes? See, there's the eyes thing again. Those who tarry long over wine. Those who go to try mixed wine. Okay, so there's the answer. Do not look at wine when it is red, when it sparkles in the cup and goes down smoothly. In the end, it bites like a serpent and stings like an adder. Your eyes will see strange things, and your heart utter perverse things. You'll be like one who lies down in the midst of the sea, like one who lies on top of a mast. They struck me, you will say, but I was not hurt. They beat me, but I didn't even feel it. When shall I awake? I must have another drink. So here we see the person who is addicted to much wine, okay? This is a problem. The Bible does address drunkenness, okay? Drunkenness is a sin, all right? Getting drunk to the point where you lose control of your faculties and your ability to make wise decisions is sinful, okay? The responsible consumption of alcohol, even to the point, I would argue, where it might start to alter or at least facilitate your joyful mood, I don't believe is sin. We saw Jesus giving wine, much wine, at the wedding at Cana without complaint about how it was being used. Of particular interest to me has always been what happens between Jesus and the Pharisees in Luke 7. So Jesus gets messengers from John the Baptist who want to know if he is the Christ, right? And when the messengers go, Jesus talks to the crowd saying, what did you expect to see by John? All right. And then the Pharisees come up and they say, what are you doing? And Jesus confronts the Pharisees, and he says here in Luke 7:33, for John the Baptist has come eating no bread and drinking no wine, and you say he has a demon. The Son of Man has come, eating and drinking. So Jesus is saying, I don't have the diet of John the Baptist, and I'm drinking. And he's not talking about water here, because he is comparing himself to the opposite of what John the Baptist did. So John the Baptist refrained from drinking alcohol, which was been really difficult in those days. Jesus is saying, no, I eat and I drink. Okay, so Jesus drank alcohol. We know that. Last Supper, Passover, all of that, okay? And yet you say at him, a glutton and a drunkard. They actually called Jesus a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. Yet wisdom is justified by all her children. Wisdom will reveal what is true. So Jesus drank wine. He might even enjoyed drinking wine. He certainly was not drunk, stumbling around, lying in the gutter of Nazareth, on Saturday morning. But the responsible consumption of alcohol is allowed in the scriptures. But drunkenness is, of course, a sin. And certainly being addicted to something where it imperils your ability to take care of yourself and fulfill your duties and take care of your family, that is definitely a problem as well. And so this habitual drinker, the one who has sorrow, who has complaining, who has wakes up with wounds, doesn't know why, who has redness of the eyes, and then wakes up and says, well, I must go out and get another. Okay, we're talking about an addict here, okay? Who go out to try mixed wine. This is mixed wine with spices. Do not look at wine when it is red. Okay, so wine in those days would have started off as sort of a concentrate, and then it would be mixed with water and diluted to a certain strength. This may be what the wedding guests at Cana were referring to when they said everyone serves the good wine first. It may not have been so much about the quality as the strength. I tend to think that it was a little bit of both, because Jesus probably made better wine than anybody else. So, but definitely, you at the very beginning, the first cup of wine, you want people to taste the alcohol so they know it's good stuff, right? But then as the night goes on, maybe you water it down a little bit more because people aren't paying as much attention, right? And you want it to go further. But when it is fresh, it is very, very deep red. It's pure red. So that's what verse 31 is talking about. And notice the redness of eyes. So the eyes are revealing the windows to the soul, right? Do not look at wine when it is red. It sparkles in the cup. Here is actually something we don't see in the English, but it literally means it has its own eye in the cup. Sparkle means it catches the eye in the cup. It has its own eye in the cup. It's looking back at you in the cup is the expression in the Hebrew here. And it goes down smoothly. In the end, it bites like a serpent. There's the hidden thing that we saw that in the wisdom as he was talking about where you're eating and drinking with wealthy or stingy people, that there's a barb in there somewhere, right? It stings like an adder. Your eyes will see strange things, so you'll hallucinate. Your heart will utter perverse things. You'll say things that you didn't mean or you didn't want to be known by. You'll be like one who lies down in the midst of the sea, tossed to and fro by the waves. If you were on top of a mast, at the top of the ship, like just wobbling back and forth. You'll say, they struck me, but I was not hurt. I didn't even feel it. They beat me, didn't feel it. When shall I wake? I must have another drink. So there is that craving. It really does speak to addiction. Now, I want you to hear me carefully. So I do believe that the Bible condemns addiction of all types, and there are many things that people are and can be addicted to. Of the addicts that I have served, and there are alcoholics among them, what they have taught me is that for many people who are addicted to something, if they could change, if you told them, cut off your right arm and you'll be free of this addiction, or you can keep your arm and continue to struggle with it, I think all of them would say, hand me the knife, I'll cut off my arm right now. Because they know what they're doing to themselves. They know what they're doing to their family members and those people around them. But addictions are powerful. Feelings are powerful. Chemical dependencies are powerful, and they often need help and intervention beyond just willpower, okay? Some of them can be handled by willpower, all right? But a lot of them, in some cases, you need help, all right? You need support of people around you that know addiction and understand your addiction and want to work with you through it and are going to be patient through that process, which is probably going to be a process like this. It's not just going to be like, okay, I was doing it, and now I'm done. Cold turkey. Like, that's a great idea, but that's not the experience of many. So, can somebody be trapped in an addiction and still be loved and forgiven by God? Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, I would argue that is the condition of every single person, okay? Because we all have our favorite sins. We're all addicted to our favorite sins and sin just in general, okay? And yet, while we were still sinners, Christ came and died for the ungodly. He did it. He rescued us because of his love of us, not of what we do or do not do or promise to do tomorrow. God loves us. He died 2,000 years before you were born, but he died for you. You did nothing. You offered him nothing. You promised him nothing, and yet he gives it to you, okay? That's how much he loves you. So, yes, addiction is sinful, and you should do your best to try to be free of that, including getting help from professionals if necessary, okay? But every time you come and you confess your sins and you receive that forgiveness, and know that Jesus, God himself, forgives you, that he remembers your sin no more, casts it in the depth of the sea, removes it as far as from the east as from the west, okay? So, can you be an addict and still be loved by God? Absolutely. We all are. God's blessings to you as you continue to struggle, all right? Find somebody to pray for you, find somebody to walk with you through it, and know that Jesus died for you, okay? So, today in Proverbs, we talked a little bit about dining etiquette, all right? Be careful about who you dine with and what you do there. Exercise some restraint, both in what you put into your mouth and what might come out of your mouth as you talk in that situation. Realize things may not be what they seem. There's definitely a theme of parental pride, as wise sons make glad parents. Wise daughters make glad parents. We've just talked about addiction, something that I didn't expect to see in Proverbs today, but there it was. And throughout the whole thing, we have this reiteration of what Jesus will say about how the eye is the lamp to the body. It directs the entire being. And so we are to set our eyes on that which is righteous and good and try not to look at the things around the world, the wealthy and pleasurable things around the world, because they are fleeting. Set our eyes on things above, and there we will find our fulfillment. God's blessings to you as you continue to study in his word. God willing, I will see you next week. I'll put the link to last week's study, Proverbs 22, right up here for you. And have a wonderful gray and rainy day. Take care.